A few years back, my husband and I planned to visit his sister in the Pacific Northwest. We're an older couple but not elderly, and we frequently take trips like this. Recently, however, we've been hearing about a new trend called stealth camping. We found it amusing since we had been doing this kind of camping for years across various states and cities. Despite that, we were intrigued by what we found online. Many YouTubers and TikTok creators were showing inventive ways to camp in crowded areas. Some ideas were clever, while others seemed quite reckless, designed purely for views, like camping in unsafe neighborhoods or without a car or tent. Regardless, we were inspired and began integrating these ideas into our cross-country trips. We started small by sleeping in our car at grocery store parking lots, then gradually moved on to more secluded spots. Instead of Walmart, we might find a nice condo or a gated community where we could feel safer. We would follow someone in, park in an unreserved spot, and spend the night without drawing attention. By morning, we'd roll out like we belonged there. It was a fun way to add a little thrill to our travels. Stealth camping is different from boondocking, which we had also done. Boondocking is camping in remote areas without amenities, while stealth camping keeps you in urban limits and allows you to use your car in ways you normally wouldn't. After a year of experimenting with stealth camping, we decided to try something different during this trip. Instead of just using the car, we would find a spot within city limits to camp outdoors. We had seen enough videos to feel confident in our abilities. Looking back, I'm not sure what we were thinking. It felt like a quintessential middle-aged adventure. Everything was going well initially. We had stopped for 3 or 4 nights and had successful outings. Now that we were in the city, we needed to choose our camping spot carefully. After grabbing a bite to eat and stretching our legs, we looked for a place to set up. Soon enough, we found a quaint little green space behind a Target. It had some ominous fencing but no warning signs, grassy areas, and a line of trees with a small hill that provided a good view. It seemed like the perfect spot for an exciting stealth camping adventure. We couldn't just set up camp with people around, though, so we waited until nightfall when the parking lot was empty. We killed time running errands and ensuring we had food and water before heading back. Sure enough, the area had cleared out by the time we returned. We didn't have a lot of gear, but we wanted to be comfortable and avoid returning to our car unnecessarily. We took our setup seriously, following the guidance from the videos we'd watched. Our tent was hidden within a thicket of trees on the hill, and it was a dark nylon, small enough to blend in with the surroundings. We set up a 2-person cot inside to keep us off the ground, which helped our backs since we were older and wanted to avoid aches. We settled into some collapsible chairs we brought, enjoying our little luxury in solitude as we shared snacks, sipped some wine, and gazed at the night sky. It was calming, almost surreal, considering we were in the heart of a major city. In the background, we could hear the hum of the highway, but suddenly we heard tires screeching in the parking lot. The hill wasn't too high, so we could see over the Target store, and it looked like a kid was driving recklessly, doing donuts or something similar. Every time we thought it would stop, the driver would cut the wheel and accelerate in a different direction. It was unsettling, but not alarming enough to scare us. Our car was parked out there, along with a few others, maybe some late-night workers or random parkers, so we hoped whoever it was would be careful. Eventually, it quieted down, and we began preparing for bed. Sitting in the dark, especially outdoors, can really mess with your sense of time. It could be 7 p.m., but it feels like midnight. I just want to sleep. As we started to put away our chairs and head into the tent, we heard that same car racing through the parking lot again, and this time it screeched to a halt. My husband and I exchanged glances. This was new. Then we heard a car door slam, followed by another, and then footsteps and voices grew louder. In a panic, we looked at each other as 2 strangers pushed through the fence and entered the green space where we were hiding. Their conversation quickly revealed that they weren't discussing anything pleasant, mostly violent topics and drug use. I couldn't believe this was happening. My husband started to stand, but I whispered for him to stay still. The trees concealed us completely. Our only danger came from making noise. He complied and sat back down, putting a hand over his mouth. Fortunately, their voices softened as they paused before a big fallen tree down below, which provided a bench-like seat. I had considered camping near it earlier, but had deemed it too close to the fence, and I was grateful we didn't. We listened as they continued talking. I'll refer to them as Person A and the loud one. Person A spoke softly but quickly, and it was hard to follow his train of thought. At first, they discussed partying and drug use, but the conversation turned darker, focusing on violence, things they'd done and things they intended to do. Then the loud one said, "Dude, what time is it? Is he even coming?" "Yeah, he said he'd be late." "He's always late," Person A replied. "Can't wait for this," the loud one added. Their talk revealed they were waiting for a drug dealer to arrive to rip him off. They were regular customers, but prices had gone up and reliability had diminished. Their desperation from addiction had turned into anger, which they planned to unleash on the dealer. We were not fond of what we heard, but our options were limited. We were outmatched, and the last thing we wanted was to confront these guys. I had a firearm, but using it would only be a last resort. We silently agreed to remain hidden and wait. The moment they left, we would call the police and leave. Their conversation became more disturbing, filled with inappropriate remarks and sinister fantasies. After a while, we heard footsteps approaching. I hoped it was a security guard, but instead, it was the dealer arriving. They exchanged greetings, and it felt almost thrilling to be the only ones privy to this clandestine meeting. However, the situation quickly escalated. The loud one asked about their order, and the dealer pulled a gun from his jacket and pointed it directly at him. "What the hell, man? You didn't say he'd have a gun," the loud one yelled. "There's a lot I didn't tell you," said Person A. "Now empty your pockets." This was clearly a setup. Person A was never going to rob the dealer. He was in on the plan. The dealer pulled out a second gun, and the loud one realized he was in trouble. He began to shout, but the two men quickly overpowered him. My heart raced as I watched, helpless. The dealer struck the loud one with the gun, not once but twice, and then the two men went through his pockets, tying him up afterward. The dealer even stuffed a rag in his mouth, showing how cold-hearted they were. They found a large sum of cash, some drugs, and a tool known as piano wire. Suddenly, my wife, who had been holding back her sneezes, let out the loudest one imaginable. I was stunned. I almost blurted out, "What the heck?" But I knew that would give us away. She quickly covered her mouth and nose, realizing she had forgotten about her allergies, and now it could cost us our safety. All three men turned in our direction. The dealer briefly aimed his gun at us, but we remained frozen, praying the shadows of the hill would conceal us. Thankfully, the dealer and Person A retreated to the parking lot, shouting threats and making comments about the loud one, who remained tied up and helpless. My wife and I stayed still as they faded into the darkness, hopping into a car that had been making all the noise earlier. Once they were gone, we took a moment to breathe, relieved. We didn't rush to get caught by any of these individuals. Once we felt certain everyone was gone, we began packing up as quietly as possible. First, we put away the chairs and tucked our gear into the cooler. We disassembled the tent carefully, avoiding any noise that could alert anyone nearby. As we were about to leave, we heard the loud one struggle against his bindings again, and this time he was making headway. Seconds later, he freed himself and scrambled up, mumbling to himself as he brushed off the dirt. My wife and I were paralyzed, unsure of what to do. We were already scared of trying to sneak by him, and now he was free. He glanced around the area before sprinting for the parking lot. We listened until his footsteps faded away before finally standing up. We were more cautious than ever, not wanting to draw any attention. Once we felt certain it was safe, we quickly gathered our belongings and headed for the car. We called 911, and my wife reported everything, though we conveniently left out the fact that we were stealth camping behind Target. The dispatcher informed us that this area often received calls, which we hadn't realized before. We had unwittingly chosen a spot in one of the cities. It was literally my first night ever stealth camping alone. I was 19 years old and had just left my home in central Illinois with the aim of cycling clockwise around Lake Michigan. As evening approached, I found myself riding along a gravel bike trail through the countryside, occasionally passing small towns. I began searching for a place to set up my tent, unsure of what that would really look like. Since I was on a bike, my gear was pretty light, just enough to get me between towns. I had a tiny solo tent, a tarp, some food and water for the night and morning, a flashlight, and a few other essentials. There were plenty of small communities along the route, so I could replenish my supplies about twice a day. I didn't have a cooler with me, so I avoided the burden that some other cyclists dealt with. Some of the backpackers I encountered were carrying up to 60 pounds of gear. As a first-timer, I was amazed by how everyone managed their setups. Eventually, I spotted a spot to my left where the bike trail ran parallel to a minor state highway. A small grassy path crossed the bike trail and led to a clearing surrounded by trees. In this clearing, there were around 8 old semi-trailers, covered in grass, clearly having been abandoned for years. However, the paths between them were well maintained. I didn't know what to think of it, but figured maybe someone was working on the rigs and needed access to the cabs. For some reason, I didn't think anything suspicious could be going on. I found a place where the trailers shielded me from view in almost every direction and began to set up camp. Instead of using my tent, I unrolled my sleeping bag and made a small fire pit to ward off insects while the sun quickly set. I ate a simple dinner, though I can't even remember what it was, and took in my surroundings. It seemed like it might have been a storage area for a construction company, housing not only old materials but also broken down semis. There were trees stretching up high, and beyond them, I could see the flickering lights of the nearest town, which turned out to be much closer than I'd thought, maybe only a mile or two away. As darkness fell, I rolled out my little electric lamp. It was small but powerful, allowing me to enjoy the area a little longer. I knew that once I turned it off, I would fall asleep almost instantly, which was just the nature of being on the road. There's something deeply human about being outdoors under the stars and shutting out the world when the sun goes down. I let the fire die out because I didn't want to maintain it through the night. I could easily extinguish it in the morning. It fizzled and sent up smoke after an hour, and I was satisfied and ready for bed. Shortly after it got dark, I turned off my lights and lay down. It's worth noting that this entire situation felt a bit creepy, but in a fun way. I knew the semis were strange, but I didn't feel in danger. The darkness enveloped my campsite like a thick blanket, heavy and almost suffocating, especially with the towering trailers around me, stretching up so high they seemed to disappear into the night sky. I felt small and utterly alone. It wasn't my first night camping, but it was the first where I began to miss home. Regrets and worries crept in just as I started to drift off to sleep. Just a few minutes after I fell asleep, I heard something that completely changed the atmosphere. The squeaking of an old hinge was followed by a loud bang. I waited and then heard footsteps thudding down the ladder of one of the cabs, padding through the thick grass below. I can't express how panic-stricken I became. My limbs felt tight, and my body wouldn't let me take a breath. Every part of me wanted to scream, but there was no way I could with my lungs feeling so empty. Thank goodness the man coughed and cleared his throat before hawking the nastiest loogie I'd ever heard. Then he took a few more steps, at which point I could see him beneath the trailer. He was 2 semis away, maybe 35 feet from me. He stopped, unzipped his pants, and began to relieve himself. I watched in horror as a stream glimmered in the moonlight, and after nearly a minute, I saw him cover his own boots in urine. Right then, I felt pure terror, like this person was completely unhinged. I know it's odd, but that little detail told me everything I needed to know about him. He walked around the trailer and wandered toward the woods outside the town. It clicked. He was likely a homeless man, and he was going to do whatever he needed to do in town that night. Beg for money, score drugs, get food, whatever his life was about. I listened for a bit, but didn't hear anything else. I realized it was time for me to act, but it freaked me out so much. I decided I'd had enough. In the dim light of my headlamp, I packed up my campsite faster than I ever had before, loaded up my bike, and hit the trail. A mile or two down the road, I found a much better place to camp. However, I didn't end up sleeping well that night. I rode until I was right outside of town and set up a little stealth camp behind the first gas station I found on the outskirts. I think it was a Speedway. There were glowing lights from the parking lot and the road sign. I didn't get much sleep, but I felt safe. I never saw that guy again, and I was relieved he hadn't discovered me. Honestly, I have no idea how he didn't, since I wasn't being quiet while I set up camp. I even had a fire and bright lamps glowing between the trailers. He had to have known I was there. Maybe he figured my presence would be enough to scare me off, and if that was the case, he would be correct. If somehow he didn't know I was there, my only conclusion is that he was just some kind of junkie who nodded off in the back of the semi. Whatever the situation, I'm extremely grateful that I never had to confront him. If you indulge me for a moment, I have another story that comes to mind. A couple of years later, I set out on what would likely become a 7-month, 5,300-mile tour of the western United States, mostly stealth camping along the way. One thing to remember when traveling like this is that forests are far from quiet at night. Over the first few weeks of that trip, I found comfort in the sounds of thousands of crickets and toads. I would often camp near a babbling creek. It was always the highlight of my night. However, it was also not uncommon to hear the yips and howls of a distant pack of coyotes. I distinctly recall one night camping between two owls that hooted back and forth throughout the night. If nothing else, even a gentle breeze would stir up music from the tree canopy. About a month and a half into this journey, I found myself somewhere in the rural mountains of western Montana. For those unfamiliar, parts of Montana are some of the most remote areas in the continental US. However, that wasn't the case this night. I was hidden among some trees just outside of town, and after turning off my light and lying down, I had a disturbing realization. Not a single cricket chirped, nor was there any toad croaking. Certainly no coyotes or owls. There was dead air, with not a single breeze stirring the dry leaves of early autumn still clinging to their branches. It was completely silent, and that silence was terrifying. I can only describe it as the loudest silence I've ever experienced. It felt like the entire forest was hiding from a silent predator. The occasional snapping of a twig, a sound normally lost in the chaos, rang out like a gunshot, completely shattering any half-sleepiness I might have felt. Then, a massive silhouette of a grizzly bear ambled up from the meadow, huffing and scraping at the earth. The crazy part was I was only about a quarter of a mile outside of town, and one of the few sounds I could hear was the random traffic drifting by. The bear didn't seem to care about any of that, though. Fortunately for me, it was still about 50 feet away, but even at that distance, it was enormous, rocking back and forth as it walked. It glanced over at me, huffed again, and continued on its merry way. The next morning, I learned that this bear was a local nuisance who regularly wandered into town to raid dumpsters a few times a week. When I rode into town that morning, there was trash everywhere, with people cleaning it up and complaining about the bear. I couldn't help but laugh. No wonder it didn't even bother with me. It had a buffet waiting just down the road. The locals themselves were scarier than the bear. Many of them had seen my little camp outside of town, so I was far from stealthy. They generally gave me the cold shoulder and did their best to send me off to the next town. Throughout the rest of that trip, I camped in sub-freezing temperatures, making stealth camping in or near towns an absolute necessity. If something went wrong, I'd be too far from help and wouldn't be able to navigate those distances in below freezing temperatures. The climate and creepy encounters weren't my only troubles, though. One night, I had a loud bunkmate above me who talked in his sleep. A guy in the bed next to me snored loudly. When my partner and I first got married, we would take seasonal trips to Florida once or twice a year, mainly for the nice weather and to catch some waves. Both of us grew up in California, loving to surf, but we didn't actually meet and fall in love until we were living in the Midwest for work. The closest beach for our adventures was quite a drive away. Since we had no friends or family in Florida, these trips were just for us to satisfy our beach cravings, enjoy some seafood, and soak up the sun. Without family to visit, we would randomly choose a different coastal town for each trip and stay somewhere new each time. Being young newlyweds, we weren't making a lot of money, and our savings were practically non-existent. We had to be frugal on these road trips, which meant no hotels at all, neither on the way nor after arriving at our chosen town. We drove a Subaru with plenty of space, and sleeping in it saved us several $100s. This was my partner's idea for keeping costs down, and being an outdoor enthusiast my whole life, I was on board as soon as she mentioned camping. However, my partner, whom I'll call Mel, didn't have traditional camping in mind. This was in the early 2000s, so stealth camping wasn't as popular as it is now. Mel had learned about stealth camping from a coworker who was a long-distance cyclist. The coworker explained that during their long journeys, sometimes the only safe places to rest were in parking lots or green spaces between businesses. Cyclists would carry minimal supplies, just enough to sustain them and supplement their needs with items they could find along the way. They would have lightweight sleeping gear like a tent or tarp, along with essentials like sunshades and can openers for convenience. So we decided to incorporate this into our Florida trips. We packed our Subaru with all sorts of random items that I imagine scouts might carry. Toothpicks, lighters, rope, sandwich bags, and batteries, those little things you don't think about until you need them. Everything was organized neatly in a storage area with our bedding, turning our car into a cozy travel sleeping spot. Mel even hung up some curtains around the back for privacy. For about 4 years, we encountered no problems with our urban stealth camping. The only challenge was that many of the coastal towns we visited had strict curfews and laws against overnight parking, so we had to find spots where street parking was common. In these small Florida towns, most people had garages or driveways, making our Subaru stand out. Yet, we always managed to find a little neighborhood or area where street parking was allowed. We would blend in for a few days, maybe even a week, then head back home. The beaches had showers and amenities, but simply finding a spot to sleep for the night was often the toughest part. Camping in plain sight actually requires more creativity than people realize. On one particular trip, we struggled to find a place to stay. It was our first night in town, and by that evening, we had been driving in circles for 3 hours with no luck finding a discreet spot to park. Finally, after winding through a more rural neighborhood, we discovered a stretch between the beach and some houses where people did park on the street. We settled in at one end, where the neighborhood ended and the road disappeared into darkness. We began our usual bedtime routine, brushing our teeth, washing our faces from a water jug, getting comfortable, locking the doors, and snuggling in for the night. Suddenly, we heard noises outside, footsteps and some quiet conversation. Someone climbed into the car parked about 250 feet behind us. They started the engine and drove off, leaving us alone on the street. Now only one other car remained parked several hundred feet behind us, and I worried they might return and get a ticket, which we couldn't afford. Mel and I discussed our options, but we felt trapped after a long day of driving and searching. Just then, from the front windshield, I saw headlights approaching in the opposite direction and stop ahead of us. I pulled back the curtains and spotted a large, dusty van parked about 75 feet away. The moment I saw it, I felt a strange unease wash over me. I shared my feelings with Mel, who took a look and then climbed back under the covers, reassuring me that we were safe in a neighborhood and should avoid drawing attention to ourselves. She was right, and I admired her bravery, but I still felt uncomfortable with how close the van was. From my spot behind the curtain, I watched someone light a cigarette in the driver's seat and smoke while staring directly at our car. I told Mel I was going to keep watch for a while because everything felt a little off. She shrugged and quickly fell asleep. I settled into the front seat, keeping low to stay out of sight. We were parked in the dark, and I wore dark clothes, making it easy to hide. I kept my eyes on the hand of the smoker, watching the glowing cherry of the cigarette. No smoke escaped the window. It felt odd. My paranoia was heightened, and I had never been so suspicious of anyone. After about 30 minutes of staring at the van, I decided to take action. I wanted to make sure this guy went away, so I set up my portable coffee maker outside the car on the passenger side, hoping to stay hidden. I was tired of waiting and wanted to challenge anyone who meant us harm. I heard the click and slam of a car door, and I looked over to see the guy from the van awkwardly staring at me from across the 75-foot gap. He walked toward me, one hand in his pocket. He didn't seem threatening, more like someone running an errand. I took a deep breath as he approached, reminding myself everything was okay. I had a 14-inch Bowie knife resting on the ground next to me, something we always traveled with. I planned to use it to scare him off or, if things got dire, to defend myself. When he got within 25 feet, he stood there, acting strange and awkward. Eventually, he broke the silence, greeting me and asking how I was doing. We exchanged brief small talk, then he asked for matches. The only matches we had were in the car, but I handed him a lighter I used for the coffee maker. He was surprised by my generosity and kept thanking me. After a few more awkward exchanges, he went back to standing around. That's when I realized how big he was. At least 6 feet 2 inches in broad, a well-built guy. The more he lingered, the more uneasy I felt. I discreetly kept the knife tucked in my waistband, just in case. I poured 2 cups of coffee into disposable cups and offered one to him. I explained I was staying awake to catch a photo shot since I enjoyed photography. That part was true, but I had no actual shot in mind. Then he dove into his backstory, telling me his name, which I don't remember, and that he had recently been released from prison. He was making his way to Miami for a job. I nodded along, pretending to be interested, but inside I was panicking. While trying to look calm, I kept my hand near the knife and scanned his body language for any sign of aggression, which never came, but I remained on high alert. I told him I wished him luck and that I would be turning in soon. He thanked me again and hung around a little longer before getting back into his van. I watched him light another cigarette and relax in the van, and for some reason, I continued to keep an eye on him. Around 2 a.m., I hadn't slept at all. My interaction with him was unsettling but not alarming enough to make me flee. I convinced myself he was just a guy down on his luck while I packed away my coffee supplies. Just as I turned to crawl back into the sleeping area with Mel, something caught my eye. I saw movement in the brush between the road and the beach. At first, it was just a shadow, but soon I could clearly see the unmistakable figure of a man, one even larger than the previous guy. He moved through the underbrush until he reached the van and quietly climbed into the passenger seat, closing the door without a sound. Now, I had 2 ex-convicts lurking just 100 feet from where Mel and I were trying to sleep. I slammed the key into the ignition and flooded the area with my headlights. In front of me, I could see both men in the van, and they flashed creepy grins through the glass. The driver waved my lighter at me, holding it up and down. Mel asked what was going on, and I quickly shifted the car into drive, wanting to get deeper into town. The sensible thing would have been to drive straight past them, but I hadn't gone down that road yet, and it was where they came from. I figured it would be safer to go where there were more people. I'll never forget looking in my rearview mirror through the blurred fabric of the curtain, seeing that van peel off the side of the road and follow us. They didn't turn on their headlights. They just trailed us in the dark. All I could see was the grille of the van and the glow of my taillights. I quickly explained the situation to Mel while she was sliding around in the back seat. I told her the guy in the van had just been released from prison and had a friend sneaking around our car. Since he didn't mention his companion, I suspected their intentions weren't good. They might be assessing our belongings. Just one look out the Personally, I've only ever gone stealth camping once, and it happened during a 2-day drive between my college and my hometown. The journey took about 20 hours, and the town that was right in the middle of that trip was called Cedar Springs, Colorado. I had never been to Cedar Springs, but had passed through it once. I had heard it was a haven for rock climbers, off-road enthusiasts, and nature lovers. Since I grew up enjoying hiking and camping, I was eager to see what the town had to offer for a traveler like me. As I planned this trip, I aimed to keep costs down. I was in college at the time, and this was my first trip home for the holidays. I was trying to figure out what this trip would cost so I could budget for future travels. My first cut in expenses was for a hotel room. I was driving my old Toyota 4Runner, and Cedar Springs had such an outdoor-friendly vibe that I thought there would be plenty of campgrounds in the area. I figured I could just stop by one for a quick overnight stay of 5 or 6 hours. The day finally arrived, and I packed up my 4Runner and hit the road. Everything went according to plan as I drove along, and by the time sunset approached, I was within 10 or 20 miles of Cedar Springs. The landscape was so bare, no trees or forests in sight as the sunlight faded. I wasn't worried, though, as I planned to sleep in my car anyway. I didn't need trees or forests for that. However, by the time I reached Cedar Springs, it was completely dark, and I had no clue where to find a camping spot. This was long before smartphones, so all I had were Google Map printouts to get a rough idea of where to go. I soon found a campground just outside of town, along the scenic stretch of the Arkansas River. If I recall correctly, it was called Riverbend Campground, located about 2 miles east of the city limits. Although I had searched for campgrounds, I failed to realize they were all paid and highly sought after. I couldn't just roll in and set up camp. As soon as I arrived, several campers approached me with flashlights, asking to see my permit or any paperwork showing I had paid. It was likely to keep out anyone unauthorized. After this happened a couple of times, I felt too anxious to stay. I didn't want to disrupt the peaceful night for everyone else. After being run out of those campgrounds, I drove back into Cedar Springs and decided to sleep in a parking lot, like a Walmart or a Denny's, where I could find a 24-hour restroom. I didn't need luxury, just the basics to get me through the night. I had initially planned to sleep somewhere remote, but my experience so far made me hesitant about going off-road. Who knew what I might encounter out there? Unfortunately, things didn't go well in town either. The place was filled with unsavory characters. Every parking lot I checked had at least one shady-looking person, if not more, wandering around. Feeling completely defeated, I decided to find a remote spot. I got my 4Runner back on the highway and drove about 3 miles south of town, then turned onto the first dirt road I saw. There was a small cattle guard between some barbed wire fences, but aside from that, it was wide open. There were some bluffs nearby, so I parked along a little ridge that partially shielded my vehicle. Still cautious about my surroundings, I draped one of my blankets across the windshield and front windows to keep prying eyes away. I then curled up in my seat, with my legs stretched across the console, my back against the door, and my feet in the passenger seat. It wasn't the most comfortable position, but I had a lot of stuff packed in the back. Plus, I wanted to be ready if anything went wrong. I reached my spot just around 9 p.m., much later than I had planned. My new goal was to grab some quick sleep and wake up by 4 a.m. to prepare myself, fill up on gas, and be back on the highway by sunrise around 5 a.m. It was bare minimum, but that was all I needed for survival. Something woke me just before my planned alarm time. I opened my eyes to see a large dirt hauler, some kind of tractor truck, idling nearby. As I peeked through the blanket curtain I had set up, I could see a man looking down at me from the cab. Not long after, the truck drove off into the desert around one of the bluffs and vanished. I didn't think much of it and tried to go back to sleep, assuming it was just a work truck on its route. About 30 minutes later, though, I heard banging on the passenger side window. I opened my eyes and checked my watch, realizing it was almost time for my alarm. I figured the police or maybe the Forest Service were here to check on me, given the timing with the truck that just left. I yanked the blanket down and found an old beater pickup truck outside, with a guy staring at me through the glass. Before I could wave, someone banged on the window right behind my head. They hit it so hard that it rattled my teeth. Slowly, I realized I was completely surrounded. I turned around and saw another guy who looked just like the first one. Plain t-shirt, jeans, and boots. They both shouted for me to get out of the vehicle. For some reason, I complied. I just wanted to explain that I was passing through and meant no harm. This turned out to be a big mistake. The moment I unlocked the doors, they yanked them open, pulled me out by my arms and shoulders, and threw me to the ground. One of them sat on me while the other rifled through my things, starting with my glove compartment. To say it was a thorough search would be an understatement. I watched as he turned my front seats upside down, dumped my glove box and console onto the dirt, and pocketed anything of value. Coins, electronics, you name it. I even saw him take my lighter just because it was shiny. I tried to explain that I was a college student from out of town and that I didn't mean any trouble. I was just lost and trying to get some sleep before hitting the road again. The guy holding me down mocked everything I said, repeating it back to me in a ridiculous voice and even slapping me a few times while laughing. He didn't care who I was or where I came from. After about 10 or 15 minutes of being pinned down, they suddenly took off. They warned me not to follow them or call the police, threatening that if I did anything foolish, they would come back and kill me. They made that very clear. At that point, I was already resolved. They didn't take much from me, mostly just some food and the little cash I had on me. Once they were gone, I climbed back into my 4Runner and drove back towards Cedar Springs. It took a while, but after circling a few times, I finally found the police department and went inside to make a report. Initially, they were quite dismissive. I was just a dirty college student with an out-of-state license. But after I explained where it happened, they seemed more interested. One of the deputies asked how far south of town I had gone. I did my best to describe where I had pulled off, and the deputy spoke with his superiors. It turned out that the guys who robbed me had been causing trouble in the area for a couple of weeks, and most reports came from the south side of town. Furthermore, the dirt road I had taken to sleep led to a sizable ranching operation. Not a dude ranch resort, but a real agricultural facility with an actual mine on the property. That explained the big truck I had seen earlier. It seemed a couple of guys had been sneaking in and out of the ranch at night, usually empty-handed, and then stumbling around until they tripped an alarm or turned on some lights, prompting them to flee into the desert with whatever they could grab. Tools, copper, raw, or building materials, literally anything they could sell for some quick cash. My bad luck ended up being a stroke of luck for the local police department. I took them to the spot where the incident occurred, and the sheriff's department was able to track those guys down. By the end of the day, they found them hiding in a small cave near the river, complete with water storage, a fire pit, and other things that made it seem like they had set up a livable space. The problem was that they had robbed locals and travelers like me to gather their supplies. After that day, I got back most of my belongings, which wasn't much. maybe $50 total, along with some personal items like my blankets. I have no idea what happened to those men, but I assume the camp was cleaned up, the missing items returned to their owners, and everything else tossed in the trash. From that point, I figured those guys were probably locked up, and I went about my business. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this was my first and only experience with stealth camping, and I can confidently say I'll never do it again. I have a tale about a car journey, but it's particularly strange because I didn't want to be on this trip at all. My girlfriend and I were having a tough time, fighting constantly and even being unfaithful to one another. It was a super toxic situation, made worse by our heavy drinking, so I'm sure you can imagine how it was. After enough arguments, I finally decided to leave. The issue was I had nowhere local to go. We had recently moved to a new city and broke up only 6 months later, so I hadn't made any real friends or connections to crash with. This left me with one option after making that choice: to pack up all my belongings into my old car and make the long journey back home. It was a 19-hour drive that I planned to split over 2 days. I had been driving for what felt like forever, and the endless highway turned into a tiring nightmare. 8 hours in, I felt trapped in a kind of automotive limbo. The sun had long set, casting a sickly yellow glow across the desolate landscape. I began to wonder if I would ever find a place to rest. Maybe splitting the journey was a bad idea after all. I wasn't familiar with the geography between my hometown and the city I was leaving, which, if you're curious, was in Tennessee. But that's not crucial to the story. In the dead of night, I felt like I was getting lost. My GPS had taken me down a winding road, with trees surrounding me like sentinels. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was completely alone. No cars had passed in hours, and I hadn't seen a soul since I stopped for gas at the last station a few miles back. Thankfully, the road was still paved, but it was a narrow 2-lane road with signs appearing every few miles. It felt far too rugged to be a main road, but at this point I was committed. For some reason, I still trusted the GPS flickering on my dashboard as I continued to drive. The silence began to weigh on me. I turned on the radio, but all I found was static. I tried to concentrate on the road, but my mind kept wandering back to the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. This was likely due to the fact that I had stopped using drugs. My girlfriend and I were heavy drinkers, but since moving to Tennessee, we had started experimenting with whatever drugs we could find. Now that they were out of my system, I felt anxious and strange, with sweat pouring from my forehead that I had only been on this trip for a few hours, but I was already feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. The miles blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and boredom. I hadn't seen anything but fields and woods for hours. I began to wonder if I'd ever find civilization again, which was important to me. Despite my paranoia, I wasn't brave enough to pull over and camp in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to find a place with streetlights, like a park or a Walmart in the next town I passed as darkness deepened. I felt a creeping sense of dread. I was alone, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of the road. I pushed that thought aside and focused on the GPS, willing it to take me somewhere safe. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spotted it. A rundown sign announcing that the next town was only 30 miles away. The problem was, by this point, I was seriously exhausted, so much so that I was nodding off at the wheel, nearly veering off the road. My fatigue was making me emotional. I felt like crying as my mind swirled with thoughts of what I was doing, being forced to retreat across the country because my girlfriend had left me. The devastation was overwhelming, and all I wanted was some sleep. Looking out the passenger window, I saw exactly what I wanted to see: a small cluster of rooftops peeking through the trees. I figured I was close enough to find some nearby communities. I decided I couldn't drive another 30 miles in my state, and since people were around, I chose to stop there. I veered off the main road, my tires crunching on gravel as I approached a small clearing. A lone tree stood in the distance, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers toward the moon. The only sound was my engine humming in the stillness. I was relieved to have a little moonlight and some distance from the houses. The last thing I wanted was to disturb someone and get the police called on me. I turned off my headlights and drove using only the moonlight, hoping they wouldn't notice me coming up the road in my little sedan. I planned to pull off the road behind some grass and catch some rest until sunrise. As I approached the tree, I noticed a small cabin leaning beside it, its windows dark and the door hanging loosely from its hinges, seeming to scream for help. A chill ran down my spine. I stopped the car and stared at it for a moment, surprised to find a building so close to the treeline. The more I looked, the clearer it was that it was definitely abandoned. I hesitated, wondering if I should keep driving, but the thought of another hour on the road was too much to bear. I pulled up to the cabin, my heart racing, and turned off the engine. The silence felt heavy with the weight of the unknown. My mind was foggy from everything I had been dealing with, feeling almost homeless and miserable while trying to find the safest way to sleep in the woods. I wasn't prepared for this kind of situation, but I figured it was just for one night, so I would make the best of it. I sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The cabin loomed over me, its empty windows staring like cold, lifeless eyes. I knew I had to get out to stretch my legs and clear my head, but as I opened the door and stepped into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something sinister, likely due to the creepy cabin I'd chosen as my temporary home. Sure, any rational person would have slept in their car, but I'm a tall guy, about 6 feet 4 inches, and my car was stuffed with everything I owned from my move. There was no way I could spread out comfortably in there, so I had to sleep outside. Luckily, I had packed my little hammock, the kind you can set up almost anywhere. I secured it to a tree on a hill above the cabin to get a view of the area, then filled it with my bedding, battery pack, water bottle, and all the random things I might need during the night. I ate a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which helped calm my nerves. I remember shaking as I climbed into that hammock. After licking my fingers clean, I mustered the courage to turn off my flashlight, embracing the darkness and enjoying the twinkling stars above as I settled in for the night, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. Then I began to hear strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but then I heard it again. Sounds of raccoons chattering and scurrying through the underbrush. We had plenty of them back in my previous town. They'd come out at night, raiding trash cans and sometimes even sneaking into houses through doggy doors. I grew up around them, so I wasn't scared, just irritated that they might bother me all night. I plugged in my headphones and tried to ignore them. However, the noise changed, and I started hearing thumping from inside the cabin I thought was abandoned. Horror gripped me at the sound, but after taking a few deep breaths, I convinced myself it was just those raccoons or some other nighttime creature messing around inside. I mean, the cabin had no doors or windows. Anything could be inside there. Again, I tried to dismiss it, telling myself my imagination was playing tricks on me. Then I saw her, an old woman with a face covered in wrinkles and eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. She limped to one of the vacant windows and stared through the empty frame. For a moment, I thought she was looking at me, but then I realized she was just gazing down at the ground. She doubled over and disappeared into the cabin for a moment. When she returned, she was dragging a heavy bag through the doorway and across the rickety wooden deck. The sound echoed through the clearing like a death knell. I was completely frozen, unable to move. I hung there in my hammock, peeking out like a child as I swayed between the trees, relieved I had hidden my car and partly concealed where I was sleeping. My cover kept me out of view as I watched. Completely transfixed, she scattered handfuls of dog food at a breakneck pace, and the raccoons flocked to her, their eyes gleaming in the dark like little droplets of water. For every raccoon I saw, there were dozens of eyes watching her from the shadows of the woods. I wanted to call out to warn her about the danger closing in on her, but my voice was stuck in my throat. Soon they were everywhere. To my horror, I looked at the trees where my hammock was tied. The raccoons were climbing down the trunks and over my straps in a full stampede. Some even paused to glance at me, curious about the strange decoration in the woods. They didn't linger long, though, just long enough to see that I had no food before returning to the bizarre gathering around the old woman. Her ritual was twisted, a bizarre midnight task. Last summer, I went hiking and camping by a small stream near my parents' home. I had visited them for a few days and then decided to head out for a night or two by myself, camping along the stream before heading back. Since I don't live in a very outdoorsy area, I always try to spend time in nature whenever I visit my parents. After seeing them, I set out on my hike. The trail I took to reach the stream was about a 4-hour walk at a steady pace, but the best part was that it was rarely used by anyone. The stream wasn't big, and there were other, more scenic trails nearby, clearly marked and popular. This one, though, was just a narrow dirt path that was barely visible. By the time I got to the stream, it was almost dark, so I quickly set up my tent and started a fire to relax before heading to bed. After a few minutes, I began hearing footsteps approaching. I looked over, and after a short time, a man came out from the trees. He waved at me and walked toward my campsite, smiling. He looked like an ordinary guy in his early 30s, though he was a bit dirty and rough-looking, as if he had been camping for some time. After introducing himself as Mike, he made some small talk, mentioning he was camping not far from where I was. I went along with the conversation just to be polite, but the situation felt a little odd. Eventually, Mike said goodnight and walked away. I watched him as he moved along the stream with a flashlight, but after a minute, the light went out and everything was quiet again. At first, I didn't think too much about it, though something about the man seemed off. What bothered me most was how he showed up just a few minutes after I had started my fire. He must have been nearby, almost like he had been following me. Still, I brushed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. He had introduced himself after all, and if he had bad intentions, why would he do that? I put out the fire, stayed up in my tent for a while, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up at sunrise and spent the day hiking along the stream. Strangely, I never saw any signs of other campsites, no tents, no fires, especially not in the direction Mike had gone. I figured he must have been deeper in the woods, but it made me a bit uneasy. Just before nightfall, I returned to my tent and was startled to see Mike sitting by my unlit campfire. "Need something?" I asked. He smiled and said he was waiting for me because he'd found something down the stream that he wanted to show me. He got up and started walking, urging me to follow him. I hesitated. "I'm going to stay here, Mike. I'm a little tired." He turned back to face me, still smiling, and asked again for me to come with him. We locked eyes for a few seconds, and I knew something was wrong. His smile started to fade, and in a less friendly tone, he asked one more time. I stayed silent. After a moment, he turned and walked toward the stream. As he moved away, I noticed a small gun tucked into the back of his pants, just visible under his shirt. While it's not unusual for people to bring firearms into the woods, I'd never seen anyone carry it like that, with their shirt hiding it. The only reason to carry it like that would be to keep it concealed, which didn't seem necessary in the middle of the forest. Seeing that was enough, I quickly packed my things and started hiking back. Thankfully, I was able to stay on the trail, even in the dark, and after about 4.5 hours of walking, I made it to my car. The more I think about it now, the more frightening that encounter seems. I'm almost certain Mike had been watching me, but I don't know for how long or whether he had been following me from the start. His attempt to lure me to the stream was likely something sinister, and if I hadn't left when I did, I'm convinced he would have returned later in the night, and I might not be here to tell this story. Last year, I decided to go on a solo camping trip in the woods, about an hour from my place. I didn't have any big plans, just wanted to spend a day outdoors and head home afterward. Even though I wasn't very experienced, I figured one night wouldn't hurt. When I got to the trail, there were already 3 cars parked by the roadside. Not really wanting to run into other people, I kept driving until I found another trail a bit further down. There weren't any parking spots there, so I had to park farther away and walk back to the trail. The path I chose was narrow and all dirt, no gravel, so it was clear that it wasn't a popular spot. As I walked, the terrain stayed mostly flat with trees and bushes all around. About 2 hours in, the trail started to get even thinner, to the point where I couldn't tell if I was still on it or not. I had a feeling this might happen when I first started, but by this point, I had already come so far that I wasn't too worried about it. I decided to turn around and retrace my steps, trying to find the clearer part of the path. But after about 5 minutes, I came across something that made me freeze. A cabin, right in the middle of the woods. My first thought was that I had to be completely lost since I hadn't seen it on my way in. Then, a strange feeling hit me. What was this cabin doing out here? I approached cautiously, and since the cabin didn't have a door, I peeked inside. It was a total mess, filled with old trash. The longer I stayed, the more unsettled I felt. I turned to head back to the trail, but before I could, I heard a loud thud behind me. I looked back at the cabin and saw a man step out from behind a wall inside. He looked to be around middle-aged, wearing torn-up clothes, and had the appearance of someone who'd been living out there. His face was completely blank, no expression at all. I quickly muttered an apology and walked away as fast as I could. When I glanced back, he was still staring at me, which made me feel even more on edge. For the next hour, I anxiously searched for the trail, constantly checking to make sure I wasn't being followed. As the sun started to set, my worry grew. But just before it got completely dark, I found the main trail again. I considered heading straight back to my car, but I decided to stay the night to avoid getting lost again in the dark. I set up my tent, unpacked my stuff, and lay down inside. I had planned on making a fire and doing some other things, but after what had just happened, I wasn't in the mood for any of it. I just wanted to rest, so I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I woke up, it was pitch black, and the only sounds were the creaks of the forest. I turned my head and saw something that made my blood run cold. At the entrance of my tent was the shadowed face of the same man, his head poking through the half-open flap. I jumped back, and the man immediately pulled away and took off. I heard his footsteps as he ran into the woods. My heart was pounding as I quickly packed up all my gear and cautiously followed the trail back to my car. I don't even want to think about what that man was planning to do while I was asleep, but the sight of his eyes in the dark still haunts me to this day. Needless to say, I've never gone back to that spot, and I rarely talk about what happened because I know it'll always stay with me. My friend, who I'll call Mike, and I used to go camping once or twice a year. We used to do it more often when we were roommates back in college, but now that we both have full-time jobs, it's harder to find the time. Mike is actually the one who got me into camping since he'd been doing it his entire life. Before meeting him, I'd never been on a camping trip. This happened a couple of summers ago during one of our annual trips. To be clear, we never went too far out. We'd usually just hike for about 2 hours, find a good spot, and set up camp. Our goal wasn't to hike, but to relax, usually staying out for around 4 or 5 days. Once we reached a nice spot, Mike and I set everything up and spent the next few days doing what you'd expect. Sitting by the campfire, having a few drinks, and chatting. We took a few walks, played some games, but mainly just relaxed. That was the whole point. On the 4th day, we agreed to pack up and leave the next morning. As the sun began to set, we got ready to start another campfire. Mike said he was going to take a short walk to gather some dry sticks for the fire and asked me to get the food ready for cooking. I did as he asked, but as the sun disappeared, Mike still hadn't returned. It had been about half an hour, which seemed a bit long just to gather some sticks. I assumed maybe he decided to go for a longer walk and wasn't just focused on getting firewood. I waited another half hour, and by then the sun had fully set and it was completely dark. I turned on our big lantern to light up the campsite, but I knew the batteries wouldn't last long if I left it on. I started getting really worried. Mike was the experienced one, so it didn't make sense for him to get lost like this. I figured I should at least start the fire, thinking if he was lost, he might see the flames and find his way back. I grabbed the lantern, collected some sticks, and got the fire going. By the time 2 hours had passed, I was seriously freaking out. I didn't know if I should go looking for him, head back to call for help, or stay put. My mind was racing with all the possibilities. What if he was injured and not too far away? Then looking for him would make sense. But if he was farther away, I could end up lost too and make things worse. About 2.5 hours after I'd last seen Mike, I heard a gunshot. It came from somewhere in the direction he had gone, and what scared me most was that neither of us had brought a gun. I jumped up and started pacing around the campsite, not knowing what to do. Eventually, I grabbed the lantern and headed out to try to find him. I hadn't been walking for long when I heard fast footsteps coming toward me. My hand was shaking as I held the lantern, and the light barely stretched beyond a few feet. Soon, I saw Mike running toward me, his eyes wide with fear. I had never seen him look so terrified. In a quiet, urgent voice, he told me we had to leave right away. We ran back to the camp, grabbed our backpacks, and left everything else behind. I asked him what had happened, but he wouldn't say anything until we were out of the woods. Once we were safe, he finally told me that he had encountered someone else during his walk. This person had approached him with a gun and forced him to follow them. Before they reached wherever the person was taking him, Mike managed to break free and run, which is when I found him. That's all he's ever told me about what happened. Every time I ask, he leaves out certain details, especially about the gunshot. I have a feeling Mike may have fought back, maybe even got hold of the gun, and did what he had to do to escape. That would explain why he looked so shaken and why the person didn't come after him. I'll probably never know the full story of what happened that night. Ever since then, Mike hasn't wanted to go camping, and honestly, neither have I. But I still wish I knew the truth about what went down in those woods.